Hey butterflies, welcome to my channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. So this is a continuation of the last X of Swords analysis. I'd like to start off by making a disclaimer as I'm mentioning the age of Aquarius. It's kind of a hot topic right now. And for anyone who's actually curious and interested in astrology, make sure you're doing your research and looking at sidereal astrology or Vedic. The placements that the collective is focusing on right now is tropical astrology, which is the westernized version. And if you have the Star Map app, you'll notice that the placements still haven't shifted to Aquarius yet, and it gets kind of confusing in that sense. But of course, it's up to you guys if you'd like to explore all that. But either way, there is a massive energetic shift taking place. And with that being said, just make sure you're using your discernment and awareness. Aside from that, I just want to make sure you know that anything I say isn't to cause fear of the future. It's just to keep a bigger picture in mind and keep ourselves grounded with the fundamentals and basics of our human self. There are so many levels to this series that reflect our reality, from the most practical and micro level to the most metaphysical and macro level. And with that being said, there's a lot of information and misinformation about December 21st, which is the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter. I'm no astrologer. You guys look into that if you're curious. But I bring it up because the celestial influences are prominent in the series and in our life. At this point in time, we can't even fathom how different it can be a couple years from now. But the most important thing we can do right now is to feel, is to connect with self, to connect with source, and to create. I always say we already have easy access to information and knowledge, and that's only one step. To then integrate what we acknowledge into our being, that's what shifts us and gives us a unique perspective. So it sounds simple enough, but right now it's kind of difficult for a lot of people, and I'll be the first to admit that. I haven't fully been checked into reality at times. I've been in La La Land distracting myself because it's easier. And La La Land looks different for everyone, a form of distraction that takes us away from having to deal not just with our emotions, but also our reality. And that can come in the form of overworking, sleeping too much, substance abuse, the amount of social media intake or reality TV, gaming, or even a busybody that's always talking and on the move. So don't think that you're alone in this. Everyone tries to put on a brave face, but the consumption of alcohol has risen, suicide rates have risen, people have lost loved ones, lost their jobs, parting from long-term relationships, or even just not being able to travel. Whatever has been the norm has been shifted in many ways for all of us. And it's important to be compassionate with yourself as much as you'd be with the person you love the most, okay? Do not compare your struggles and your pain to anyone else's, okay? But at the same time, deal with it. Deal with the hard stuff, sit with the difficult questions instead of distracting yourself. So Apocalypse, with his awareness of community now, he's integrated the feminine wisdom, where the masculine energy is structure and it's about logic, taking action, and compartmentalizing. The feminine energy is chaos and it's about wisdom, intuition, surrendering to what's out of our control and learning to go with the flow. Some things we can think, overthink, and rethink, and that gets us stuck in this loop because certain things at certain points, it's not about thinking anymore as much as it is about feeling, letting go, or releasing. I've done 2 videos on surrender, and it's referenced often because surrender itself is a feminine energy. Bringing it back to Saturn, who rules change, in the midst of change, it's the feminine wisdom that helps us through to surrender to the flow by accepting what is and giving ourselves compassion and empathy. And some people don't know how to do that because their feminine is dormant. They left their feminine for dead. So it's always, what can I do? And of course, action is very important in order to get shit done. But sometimes we need to surrender, flow, rest, allow, accept, let go. And when certain things are out of our control, we fight it to our own detriment sometimes, when all we really need to do is surrender, including to these celestial influences, and work with them instead of against them. That's the message of Apocalypse surrendering to Saturn, because there are certain changes that are out of our control, and this goes back to the videos I did on the Wheel of Fortune card and tarot, how it represents astrology and destiny, and in the end, even Saturn pulls out the Wheel of Fortune card itself. Now, as above, so below is a primary concept here as well. They've been saying it since House of X, and it means whatever is happening above in the celestial, in the spirit realm, it's reflected on Earth in the physical realm. People think they don't have control over their destiny sometimes, but how it plays out and how it unfolds is all up to us. There are changes in certain energies that come into play that are out of our control, yes, but that doesn't mean we can't work with them. And that definitely doesn't mean we can't choose the direction we go in. And that's the cheeky undertone with Saturn here, because it's really about playing the game. And that's why all this has been a big ass game, right? Everyone's like, why are you doing this to us and making us fight each other and play all these damn games when you have control over whatever you want to do? And that really sounded like a reflection of people's perception of God, because it's hard to understand for some people, if God is so great, why does the universe let all these negative things take place? And they've actually answered that question in the series as well. Everything has its opposites. Light can't exist without the dark. And in that same way, there's an opposing force to everything. And it's really up to us just how much we entertain the external opposite forces, right? But when it comes to within, that's a different case because we don't ignore it either. We can be about soul and spirit and still please our ego. It's not about getting rid of the ego. It's not about ignoring emotions that we deem quote unquote negative, like anger and jealousy, because that's what creates these internal conflicts, okay? We want to accept all that we are, no matter what stage we are at. And that's just the paradox of us as people, as humans. We always have potential for growth, but we are also always whole as we already are in any given moment, okay? If you're on a healing journey right now, if you're trying to feel and do all that stuff and you're like, oh my God, know that at this very moment, you are still whole and you can claim that, say it so and make it so. And even in the very end, Ryle, the fish lady, she asks Saturn, how were you able to be so calm and play the game through the chaos as if you knew everything was going to work out? Did you actually know? And it's because she learned to flow with chaotic energy. And the main component in that is that she looks at it like a game. She's playful about it. And that's another message. We take things so seriously, and it is serious, of course. I don't ever want to downplay what we experience, but it kind of is a damn game at the same time, okay? Saturn is saying, play the cards you're dealt. You don't need to believe in tarot cards and astrology, but we're all dealt certain cards and life is always throwing something at us, and it's important that we can still have fun in between. And this is where inner child healing comes in. So if you're in a real game and you die, most of the time you repeat that level till you make it to the next one. And what happens if something happens and you have to start from level 1 all over again? You'll still do it if you're invested in the game enough. So that's really the question. How invested are you in this game of your life? If you keep going back to the level that makes you die, then find new tactics, new strategies, a different way of thinking so that you can level up. Back to Saturnyne, like I've said, she represents the celestial influence of Saturn, who has been heavily affecting us and will be continuing to do so. And Saturn is all about change, time, and hard work to build the foundation of what we truly want. Saturn is definitely the planet of tough love. She's the strict teacher that won't let us take loopholes, but it's for our own good in the long run. There's no sympathy from Saturn if you're not putting in the work to where you need to be, whether that's physically or mentally. And if you're feeling like, well, my mental health is just so low and I can't do X, Y, and Z, that happens. Don't be hard on yourself for where you are currently are. But in that case, what are you doing to heal and get your mental back right? Are you actually doing the work, or are you constantly just reading and watching things on mental health but not actually facing your inner wounds, traumas, and triggers? But back to Saturn, her as the person, they're focusing on what happens when destruction doesn't have its counterpart. What happens when you abandon your feminine side and leave it for dead? And that's why in the very end they say she had won everything she had ever needed, but not the one thing she truly wanted, which is love. Long may she reign, the lonely queen, which is so sad, but that's because of her own lack of empathy, which ultimately pushes everyone and her love away. Just like Isca the Unbeaten, they're both ruthless and very left-brained. And I will definitely do a video on Bae and Cypher because I have so much to say about their little interaction. But they fell in love, and so Bae chooses to fight with him, and Isca says how embarrassing to get caught on the losing team. And Bae responds by saying how embarrassing to march with so many and yet be so alone. An example of fighting to win just to feel like the loser in the end. And that's the consequence of playing into the power struggle. Just like Saturn and just like Genesis had Apocalypse not stepped in. So Isca is unable to surrender. She switches side based on who's going to win because that's her power. She has to win. But who says it has to be that way? Why can't she stay with the losing side for once? And that's the power struggle energy again. I gotta win. I gotta be on top. It's the only thing I know. They're prime examples of what happens internally when we abandon our feminine and stop feeling, and that's their commonality. They lack empathy and they may always win the game, but in real life they lose because they're unhappy and they're unfulfilled. This is what's happened to a lot of people. People are disconnected from their heart space, from feeling. It's easier to talk shit. It's easier to escape through substances, through work, through other people, social media, because we have all these distractions and it's accessible. We feel less, especially with all this physical space this year, or even generally. It's becoming a bit more foreign to truly be vulnerable because that requires us not to only be present in the moment, but also open. And it's very easy to tell ourselves to be vulnerable versus actually doing it, especially because sometimes it's masked with our defense mechanisms. In the video on surrender, I spoke about internal deaths, and we all experience destruction and death on a mental level, in some way, at some point. And remember when Saturn spares Cable because she says some deaths are of the spirit. Because he was so devastated about letting his dad down, that's all he cared about in the battle, was making his dad proud, right? So when he lost, he was just like dead inside about it. There are so many variations and levels of experiencing death within, and I also did an entire video on being alive or dead. And that's another major theme because a lot of people are dead on some level, and we don't realize we're dead until we actually wake up at some point. But there are also the deaths that we're aware of. We know when things have made us colder or lose hope in people or love, when we can't feel the same way we used to about certain things, even if we tried because of the traumas. There are many deaths that cripple us both consciously and subconsciously. So it's important to find a way for us to reconnect, especially in the age of virtual connection, okay? And that's why I brought up the AI. It's not necessarily about AI actually destroying humanity, but humanity being lost, because what is humanity? You know, it's feeling, it's being in touch, it's being connected. So when everything becomes virtual and we stop feeling, and we become the AI in a sense, and that's how AI takes over us. And the root and sacral chakra is so relevant for this. I did an entire video on the sacral chakra because it governs our emotions, sexuality, and creativity. And one way to help us feel and to connect is to create, which is why it's been such a huge theme in this series. And that doesn't have to mean purely artistic creation, right? Whatever your soul calls you to do, as I say this, the thing that pops up in your mind, do that. Remember, even the titles of X of Swords, there was creation, stasis, and destruction. We've experienced quite a bit of destruction and ongoing stagnancy as well, where we feel like we're just not even moving. But I do believe fortune is on our side in the long run. And listen, not just to your heart, but also your body. Get the rest you need and the nutrients, and that includes the consumption in our minds. As much as Apocalypse used his feminine wisdom, he also used his mind to unite the separation of Krakoa and Oroko, right? I'm only focusing on the heart space because that's what gets neglected most of the time. But of course, balance is key and logic in the mind is just as important. So Saturn says one person from each place has to swap, and remember the islands are mutants themselves, so he chooses the island. So he found a different strategy in all the chaos. So then Genesis asks her husband if she can choose him to go live with her, and the romantic in me was completely gushing over them, even though it was such a short-lived reunion for how much Apocalypse would speak on his wife. But it was definitely impactful. Apocalypse says yes, but I have to warn you, I've changed. I'm not the same mutant you left behind. And she says, I know. I see what you truly are, and calls him by his new Krakoan name, which I still don't know how I'm supposed to say. But they see each other's soul, and it kind of reminded me of Avatar when they say I see you. But I just wanted to add that part because it was just super cute, okay? But as for annihilation, it's a necessary component because there's always going to be someone in power. And Saturn even says nothing changes in regards to what's required. Whoever wields the helm controls the world. And that world most certainly does need controlling. But she transforms it into a sword where it's more of a tool now instead of this all-consuming force, right? So I'm sure we'll be seeing the power shifts take place in the upcoming years. But anyways, I think I covered everything as far as a general X of Swords breakdown. I really hope you butterflies enjoyed it. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. It's time to be grounded and rooted so that we don't get lost in all this excess information and misinformation, okay? So using our discernment is about to be more necessary than ever. So make sure you exercise the balance of your heart and brain, because what we see is not always what it is until we find out down the line. And we're here to think for ourselves and create our own world. And that all happens through the willpower of our mind and with the fuel of our heart that's sparking that fire. So on that note, stay flying free, and I'll see you next time. Bye.